This is the International Soccer Preview, and we are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to Series 16. We're looking at the groups of the 2023 Gold Cup. This is Group C: Costa Rica, Panama, El Salvador, and a team yet to be decided. Here we go. It's the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada. It's Series 16. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Connor. And today we will be looking at Group C for the Gold Cup 2023 tournament. This group includes Costa Rica, Panama, El Salvador, and a playoff winner.
A playoff winner, yeah. So we usually get some information about the media cast at this point, but we're going to post separate media casts for outlining our past, present, and future series to save a bit of time here. So suffice to say for now that the African Cup 2023 qualifying and the Euro Cup 2024 qualifying series that are already, they're still relevant as they are ongoing. But meanwhile, let's get on with this one.
So this series covers the usual information and features a deep dive into the history of the CONCACAF regional tournament for each of the teams.
Yeah, so let's look at the three sections we'll cover in this media cast. Part one, we'll do a general introduction of the teams in the groups. Part two, we'll do an overview of each team's history in the World Cup and in the Regional Cup.
Yeah, and as mentioned, this series features a deep dive into each team's history in the Regional Cup.
Right, so part two is the longest part. And part three will be a comparison of the teams in terms of their ranking, head-to-head records, and their odds. And we'll end with a discussion of the prospects and our predictions.
All right, well, before we begin, tell me something that'll get me into this group.
Okay, well, I was looking for a hook. I don't think it's a great one, but we do have two teams whose fortunes are waning and one team whose fortunes were supposed to be waning, but are not. Any guess at the outset, or should we leave it a mystery?
Let's leave it a mystery.
Okay.
Well, this is probably as good a time as any to say that we are doing this media cast before the final playoffs, meaning that the fourth team has not been decided yet.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, those teams will be decided just 4 days before the tournament begins, which wouldn't give us time to produce this series. And also, you're taking a road trip during this period, Connor.
That's right. I will be going to Vancouver Island, which is on the far west coast of Canada.
Yeah, actually, for the non-Canadians, we prepared a couple of maps so you can tell us a little bit about your trip.
Yeah, so we're here in Edmonton, which is right in the center of Alberta. And I'll be headed down with my family to Vancouver Island. So that's about a 12-hour drive to Vancouver, a ferry ride across the ocean, and then another couple hours drive north. So it's a long journey, probably 16 hours in total.
Wow. Well, we have a little map on for the YouTube viewers, and that there's kind of that long island on the southwest of British Columbia, and here's a closer up view of it. So, Connor, you were married there.
That's right. My wife is from Campbell River, which is about halfway up Vancouver Island, or 4 hours north of the provincial capital, Victoria.
Okay, well, going to visit your wife's family, will the Gold Cup, watching the Gold, will you be able to watch the Gold Cup, or will it be a strain on the marriage?
I'll watch as much of it as I can get away with.
All right. Okay, well, instead of covering Team D, which we can't, the playoff winner, we are going to give a short overview of the four candidates there. So who are the four candidates, Connor?
Yeah, so there's four teams kind of in a playoff format. They are Martinique, Suriname, St. Lucia, and Puerto Rico. Yes,
okay, so we'll give a kind of an overview of them and maybe include them in the discussion at the end too. Okay, right. Let's move on, and we're going to begin with an introduction of each team. So take it away, Connor.
Yeah, beginning with Costa Rica, their nickname is Los Ticos. Costa Rica has a population of about 5 million people, and the country's located between Nicaragua to the north and Panama to the south.
Cool. That is the first team. And Panama next.
Panama, their nickname is the Maria Roja, or the Red Tide. They have 4.5 million people. So this is the second smallest country in Central America in terms of population, only ahead of Belize. And it's also the southernmost country in North America, linking North and South America together. And their only North American neighbor is their group mates, Costa Rica.
I see. Okay. And finally, El Salvador.
Yeah, El Salvador, known as La Selecta, or the national team. The population there is 6.5 million people. But geographically, it's the smallest country in Central America. It sits under Guatemala and Honduras, and actually is the only country in North America without a border on the Atlantic Ocean.
Interesting. Okay, and we won't be doing demographic information for the four teams, but we will leave that to when we actually talk about, when we actually give a short introduction of each. So let's go to a quick comparison of those three countries there, Connor.
Yeah, three countries, all in Central America, and all actually pretty similar populations. The smallest country in terms of area is El Salvador, but it does have the largest population. It's 6.5 million. Costa Rica has 5 million and Panama 4.5. So yeah, three, I guess, superficially similar countries in that regard.
Yeah, I actually didn't realize that they were so close in terms of population. I thought they'd be kind of more spread out there. Okay, let's move on to part two then, and we'll begin with an overview of the teams, beginning with Costa Rica and an overview of their participation and achievements. So their first international game was in 1921, and Costa Rica is a far more senior team than many will give credit for. They first entered the World Cup in 1938. They actually withdrew there, and their entry wasn't accepted in 1954, so they began competing for the World Cup in 1958, participating regularly ever since. They competed in the first regional competition in 1963 and participated consistently except for one withdrawal in 1967.
Yeah, as a small country, just 5 million people, they have a pretty impressive record. They first reached the World Cup in 1990, and from 2000, they've been regular qualifiers, with the exception of 2010. 2014 is their best result, a quarterfinal finish at the World Cup. In regional play, they won the CONCACAF Championship in its first edition in 1963 and have 3 titles in all. The last was in 1989, the last competition before it became the Gold Cup. Second place in 2002 is their best result in the newer competition.
All right, cool. And quiz time, Connor. Do you remember the 3 teams that they beat out in the 2014 World Cup group stage?
It was England and Italy and Uruguay.
Well done.
All right.
Great. Sorry if I put you on the spot a bit there. All right, let's move on to a World Cup overview. And do you want to take that one?
Sure. So it took a long time to reach the World Cup for Costa Rica, despite the relatively easy passage the region provides. Even Mexico sometimes faltered to make room for others. Costa Rica came close in their first 3 entries from 1958 to 1966, but not again until 1990, their regional strength roughly paralleling that. They finally made it in 1990 and got past the group stage for their second best finish in the tournament. That, together with their last regional title in 1989, seemed a peak year, but they did not qualify for the next 2 tournaments. From 2002, however, they began qualifying regularly, and in World Cup qualification at least, seemed the 3rd or 4th strongest team in the region. This faltered when they missed the Cup in 2010, but 2014 not only saw their return, but their best World Cup result ever by reaching the quarterfinals.
All right. Well, we'll do a quick overview of the Regional Cup now. And a charter member in the regional competition. They've won it 3 times. Actually, they won the first edition in 1963 and repeated in 1969. And that was a strong period where they finished in the top 3 in 4 of the first 5 editions of the Cup, and the 5th being their withdrawal in 1967. Their weak period was very weak, failing to even qualify from 1973 to 81, but regained strength here sooner than in World Cup play by coming in the top 4 from 1985 to 1993 and winning their 3rd title in 1989. After a weak spell in the late 90s, which tracks with their World Cup record, they have passed the group stage every time since 2000, with a 2nd place finish in 2002. In recent years, they've reached the semi-finals twice in 2009 and 2017. But given their World Cup consistency, reaching only the quarterfinals in 7 of the last 9 editions has to be considered an underperformance, especially in 2015, where their follow-up to that really successful World Cup performance was a mere quarterfinal finish.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there.
Yeah, okay, and now we move on to the deep dive of this series, and that is into the regional cup finals. So take it away.
Yeah, with the USA as a non-entity in the region, and Mexico as an inconsistent rival, that's in the early days, the door was open for Costa Rica to shine, and shine they did. The regional cup was known as a CONCACAF championship from its start in 1963. And though the tournament took place in El Salvador, they won it, tying Mexico and ensuring their knockout in the initial group stage and beating the hosts 4-1 in the final game of the round robin, final round to take the title.
Yes. Well, El Salvador was their only loss in 1965, but they tied Mexico again here and finished in 3rd behind Mexico and the tournament host Guatemala, who they also tied. They withdrew from the tournament in 1967, but then they hosted it in 1969 and won, beating Mexico and helping to subject them to a 4th place finish.
1971 saw them finish 3rd again, behind Mexico and an informed Haiti, but they failed to even qualify in 1973. The tournament was now played every 4 years instead of 2, and was a qualifier for the World Cup. It proved a period of weakness for them as they failed to qualify in 1977 and 1981. They did better in 1985, passing the group stage to reach the final round robin, but there they finished last of 3 behind Canada and Honduras. They came back to win the final edition of the CONCACAF Championship in 1989, their 3rd title, and that was aided by the disqualification of Mexico.
Right. Well, 1991 began the Gold Cup era, and they qualified through a local Central American tournament called the UNCAF Nations Cup. And as the strongest team in the region, it meant consistent qualification for the Gold Cup, except for 1996, where they finished a ghastly 4th in the UNCAF Nations Cup. So not only did they qualify for every Gold Cup otherwise, but they passed the group stage every time, except in 1998, though their striker did win the Golden Boot Award on the strength of just 2 games.
Wow. The Gold Cups started fairly roughly for Costa Rica, with unimpressive performances in the first 2, and as mentioned, their worst results in the next 2 up until 1998. In fact, the tournament has rarely seen them perform up to expectations. Their quarterfinal finish in 2000 was close to the mark, but only places them in the top 8 of a region where they should be 3rd or 4th. They did live up to that with 2nd place in 2002 and 4th place in 2003, but they otherwise reached the semifinal only in 2009 and 2017, with quarterfinal finishes in the other 7 tournaments from 2005 to 2021. That includes 2015, which, as we mentioned, was a disappointing result after a remarkable performance in the 2014 World Cup.
All right. And instead of taking that overview up to 2021, we're going to review their most recent tournaments. And the most recent Gold Cup was in 2021. How did they fare there? Maybe getting past the quarterfinals?
Yeah, well, I guess we'll start with qualifying, which was now through the Nations League. So they beat Curacao away, but otherwise tied all their games in their Nations League A group, though it did prove enough to finish atop and qualify them for the Cup. Changing their manager just days before the Cup, they were not as convincing as the 3 wins in the group stage over Guadeloupe, Suriname, and Jamaica showed, often flat in the first half but scoring in the third quarter of the game. Suriname almost earned a tie on a late strike off the post. But that flatness showed in the quarterfinals when they met Canada, who dominated them as much or more than the 2-0 scoreline reflects.
All right, so another quarterfinal finish for them, but they did manage to reach the World Cup once again. How did they get there?
Yeah, they were one of 5 teams to questionably receive a bye to the final round in qualification. Theirs was a qualification of 2 halves, looking quite weak early on, losing to the top 3 teams and managing only draws with most of the weaker ones. But in truth, the home and away factor made it seem worse than it was. But they were in 5th, 5 points behind Panama at the halfway point being seven games. After that, though, they suffered only a draw in Mexico and ended not only well ahead of Panama, but tied with the U.S. in 3rd. And had head-to-head games being the tie-breaking criterion, it would have been 3rd. As it was, 4th of 8 in the final group stage, which was the Octagon, sent them to an intercontinental playoff, where in a controversial game, which New Zealand dominated, they won by virtue of a goal scored in the 3rd minute. At the World Cup, they were thrashed 7-0 by Spain in their opening game of the tournament, but they recovered to beat group winners Japan and took the lead against Germany, though eventually lost and finished last in the group.
Right, so really in all 3 of those, Connor, the last 4 games, so last 5 games of qualification, and then against New Zealand, and then after their thrashing, really the veterans pulling it out of a hat for them.
Yeah, definitely. Qualification certainly didn't seem likely at the midway point. It was really just a stunning string of results in the second half of qualification that pulled them through. And then, yeah, a bit lucky to beat New Zealand, but kind of an up and down World Cup, the humiliation of the big loss, but then, beating group winners Japan and taking the lead against Germany. It was a really topsy-turvy group, and they played their part.
Yeah, working out quite differently than expected, that group. Okay, well, their most recent tournament, I guess, is the 2023 CONCACAF Nations League, and that acted as qualifying for this cup too.
Yeah, and quite interesting, in part because they were paired with Panama, as well as Martinique, a team they could end up meeting in this group stage. And Costa Rica beat Martinique home and away, but lost both of their games to Panama. So they finished 2nd out of 3. It was enough to qualify for the tournament, but not enough to see them through into the final tournament, the kind of the top 4 of the Nations League.
Right, so not only the playoffs there in mid-June, but also the finals of the Nations League. Yeah. Okay, well, let's take a look at players. And actually, before we talk about Costa Rica as a team, I'll just make a little note on the player section here, on the teams here and below before we begin. So we did a deep dive into Costa Rica's players for both World Cup qualifying and World Cup finals. For Panama and El Salvador, it was just the World Cup qualifying series where we took a close look at their players. So those are all available on YouTube and on the podcast feeds. And for this series, well, I got to be honest and say we were planning to do a similar player podcast for the Gold Cup teams here. But I got to confess that I thought the Gold Cup started in mid-July rather than on June 24th. So that squeezes the time quite a bit. So if we do a player podcast, it'll be a briefer version. So if you want the details, you can maybe go back and look at the previous series there.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, well, let's take a quick look at Costa Rica's players in this mostly team podcast. So, Costa Rica has only played 2 games since the World Cup, but the long overdue renewal does seem underway. 37-year-old Brian Ruiz seems to be the only confirmed retirement. He's hanging up his boots at the club level also. But 35-year-old Celso Borges can't be far off, and to a lesser degree, 36-year-old goalkeeper Keylor Navas, who actually rarely plays in Gold Cups anyway. Brian Oviedo and Johan Venegas, 33 and 34 respectively, also didn't play in March. So these are names that have defined the team for the last decade or more. Some of their veterans did play in March. Joel Campbell, who's with Leon in Mexico, and Francisco Calvo with Konyaspor in Turkey, and also Yeltsin Tejada. I forgot to write his club there. Anyway, among the remaining players, about half of them play in Costa Rica, and the biggest clubs represented outside of that are Jewison Bennett with Sunderland, Rowan Wilson of Gil Vicente, and Brandon Aguilera of Estoril. Both of those are smaller clubs in Portugal. So all 3 of those players are 21 years old or younger. So they do represent the top youth of Costa Rica that we've been calling for over our last few media casts on Costa Rica. But all in all, Connor, I got to say, what's coming in seems to be far less quality than what's going out. And I'm thinking Costa Rica may be a weaker team over the next while.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, we thought we'd see that in CONCACAF World Cup qualifying, and we did through the first 7 games when the veterans kind of pulled them out of it. But, the fact that they had to turn back to the veterans rather than kind of, pursue a youth or a rebuilding movement, I think is a bit worrying. So, yeah, possibly a team on the decline.
Yeah, we'll talk a bit more about that when we get to the discussion segment of the tournament. But we'd better move on to our second team, Panama. And once again, we begin with just an overview of their participation and achievements. Panama first entered World Cup qualification in 1978 and participated consistently from that time. They entered the regional tournament much earlier from its first edition in 1963, but their participation was patchy there until 1977, from which time they've entered consistently.
In terms of achievement, Panama earned their first World Cup qualification in 2018 after years of steady improvement. In the Regional Cup, 2 second-place finishes in 2005 and 2013 are also evidence of this improvement.
Right, and we'll take a closer look at that in the deep dive. For now, let's move on with a somewhat closer look at the World Cup history of Panama. So actually in World Cup qualification, they did very poorly until 1998 when they had a good run. But evidence of improvement, though much more visible in regional play, can also be seen in their making the final round of qualifying for the 2006 World Cup. 2010, however, was a step back as they unluckily dropped out early because they were misseeded, losing to El Salvador in just round 2 of 4. However, 2014 saw them reach the final round again and come within minutes of earning an intercontinental playoff spot. They improved their performance a notch in 2018 to capitalize on the shocking failure of the USA to reach the Cup. The glory of reaching the Cup was not overshadowed by doing poorly once there. They lost all games, but were happy enough to score 2 goals.
Yeah, great achievement for them.
Yeah. Okay, let's turn to an overview of their regional cup before the deep dive.
Yeah, so their progress has been more evident and actually quite dramatic in regional tournaments. Before 2005, they only qualified in 1963 and 1993, failing to pass the group stage both times. Since 2005, however, they've qualified every time. They shocked in 2005, coming second and reached at least the quarterfinals every time since. Second place again in 2013, maybe a bit deceptive since most of the rivals sent weaker teams, but following up with third place in 2015 puts them firmly among the second-tier teams in CONCACAF.
All right, and we will take a closer look at that in our deep dive. So, all but one of the 10 teams that entered reached the finals of the first regional tournament in 1963. Known as the CONCACAF Championship from its start until 1989, Panama did not undergo any qualification for that inaugural edition. They were competitive, finishing third of 5 in the group stage there, and actually just a point shy of an advancing position. 1965 did have a qualifying phase, and they finished last in the group of 3. I'm actually making a mistake there. 1965, they didn't enter the tournament. In 1967, they failed to qualify.
That's right. Yeah, they failed to qualify also in 1969 and did not enter the following 2 tournaments in 1971 and 73. By that time, the CONCACAF Championship also served as a World Cup qualification tournament, so their return in 1977 was also their first World Cup qualification campaign. They failed to qualify for that and for all CONCACAF championships until the tournament was replaced by the Gold Cup in 1991.
Yes, qualification for the Gold Cup was based on results in a more local tournament, as we mentioned with Costa Rica, the UNCAF Nations Cup. This was a cup just played among Central American teams, and the top 3 to 5 finishers, depending on the year, would qualify for the Gold Cup, and Panama failed to do so in 1991. However, in 1993, they did, marking a return to the larger regional tournament after a 30-year absence. And there they managed to draw with Jamaica, but they finished last in the group stage. And that would be their only entry in the Gold Cup until 2005, as they never finished higher than 4th in that regional Central American UNCAF Nations Cup. And in fact, they didn't even enter that cup in 1999.
Their 4th place finish in 2005 was enough to earn them entry to the 2005 Gold Cup, and there they surprised with a 2nd place finish. Unconvincing in the group stage, they beat South Africa on penalties and then Colombia to reach the final, where they took the USA to penalties. They lost the shootout agonizingly, but established themselves as a much stronger team going forward.
Yeah, in fact, they never failed to qualify again, and they finished no lower than 5th in the local tournament, and usually in the top 3, even winning that Central American Cup in 2009. So it was not only steady qualification for the Gold Cup from 2005, but they never failed to pass the group stage, with only one exception, which we'll talk about later. But it was a quarterfinal finish half the time in 2007 and in 2009, and also in 2017 and 2019. But even better than that from 2011 to 2015.
Yeah, and I'll talk about those. So after 2 quarterfinal finishes in a row, going out to the USA in both cases, they passed the quarterfinal in 2011 by beating El Salvador on penalties. They fell to the USA in the semifinal, and then there was no 3rd place match. In 2013, they beat Mexico in the semifinal, but went out once again at the hands of the USA, this time in the final. In 2015, they lost to Mexico in extra time in the semifinal, but had the satisfaction of finally beating USA in the 3rd place match, winning on penalties.
That's right. Well, that proved a peak for them as they returned to quarterfinal finishes over the next 2 Gold Cups, falling to Costa Rica in the quarterfinal in 2017 and to Jamaica in 2019. And for the Gold Cup in 2021, we will take a closer look, since that's their most recent tournament.
Yeah, despite a 4-1 win over Bermuda, this is in qualifying in Nations League A, 3 days earlier, they lost 2-0 to them at home, and also lost both games to Mexico in their Nations League A. However, they still managed to finish 2nd in the group stage and qualify directly for the Cup. There at the tournament, it started with a thrilling game against Qatar, where they came from behind 3 times to earn a 3-3 draw against superior opposition. They deserved a better result against Honduras in their next match, but lost what was also an entertaining game. And a win over Grenada in the last game was not enough to avoid third place in the group stage. So they didn't advance, and it was actually the first time they failed to pass the group stage since 2003.
Wow. All right. Well, we will take a look at their World Cup campaign. It was quite a long campaign because unlike the top 5 teams in the region, they had to go through the first 2 rounds of qualification.
Yeah, that's right. So prior to some changes, they were actually ranked 9th in the region, even behind Curacao. So had no hope of reaching the Hex despite having qualified for the previous World Cup. But in the revised system, they were forced through 2 rounds of qualification to reach the final round. And they had no problem with the weak teams in the first. Dominican Republic were the strongest opposition, and they won all their games. And they then beat Curacao in a playoff round. They proved that bye system in the whole set originals had a questionable with a really solid performance in the octagon, going undefeated at home and remaining in 4th for most of the campaign. On the road, though, wins over Jamaica and Honduras were good, but they lost all their other matches, which eventually saw them finishing 5th in the final group stage, just missing out on that intercontinental playoff.
Yeah, Costa Rica making up the ground there at the end. Okay, yeah, so of course they didn't qualify for that World Cup. And then their most recent campaign has been the 2023 UEFA Nations League. And actually, we kind of reviewed that because they were in a group with Costa Rica.
That's right. And as I mentioned, they beat Costa Rica both home and away. Their only drop points were on the road in Martinique. That was a 0-0 draw, but they otherwise were pretty convincing. They finished group winners with 10 points from their 4 matches. We'll go into the 14 final round of the Nations League.
Right, I'm playing Canada in the first game there. I'm looking forward to that. Okay, let's finish Panama with a look at their players. Again, we did do a deep dive into their players in the World Cup qualifying series. And but we'll just do an overview here. Panama has only played 4 CONCACAF Nations League games since the end of World Cup qualifying. That ended in March 2022. But they have played a lot of friendlies. They looked good in Nations League play, and they have done better than expected after a spat of retirements following their 2018 World Cup appearance. The only remaining veterans with 50 caps or more are Anibal Godoy, Gabriel Torres, and Roland Blackburn, all 33 or 34 years old. The latter 2 last played in June 2022, whereas Anibal Godoy played in November. So their status on the team, as in whether they are still on the team, is uncertain. But too much shouldn't be read into that because Panama seems to have used friendlies to build up a big pool of players to draw on. Goalkeeper Miguel Carmago and Luis Mejia are the most experienced players who played in March. About half of the players are with local clubs in Panama, and most of those playing outside the country are in the Americas. Actually, none with Mexican clubs, but a few with American clubs. The worldwide representation is pretty thin. Levski Sofia in Bulgaria, Armenia Bielefeld in Germany, and Famalicha. Help me, Connor.
I'm not sure. Family Chow.
You did better than I in Portugal. So those are all really 3rd-tier teams in Europe and probably roughly as prestigious as the American clubs. So no kind of big names on the clubs, but a pretty solid team, Connor.
Yeah, and some players who may become bigger names, as you mentioned. Unlike Costa Rica, they seem to be doing a slightly better job at replacing some of their veterans. I mean, still lots to be seen, and Panama could do better or worse, or same with Costa Rica. But I think packing in some friendlies to try out some players, and then doing well in the Nations League are all kind of good signs for Panama.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. So we, have a real battle set up between Costa Rica and Panama, having kind of gone toe to toe over the last little while. Okay, I will move on to El Salvador, our third team, and we'll begin with an overview of their participation and achievements. First international game for them was in 1921, and again, probably a much older team than many realize, first entering the World Cup like Costa Rica in 1938. But like many teams in the Americas, they withdrew when it became known that the cup would be held in Europe for the second straight time in a row, rather than alternating the cup between Europe and the Americas as promised. So they were also reportedly invited to the 1950 World Cup, but they withdrew. So they didn't enter until 1970, but participated consistently after that. In regional competitions, they were there from the first edition in 1963, actually hosting that first edition. But participation was patchy in the early years. They didn't enter the third edition in 1967, were disqualified in 69, and withdrew in 71. However, their participation, like the World Cup, has been consistent since 1973.
El Salvador was qualified for 2 World Cups in 1970 and 1982. While this is by far their best achievement, they lost all games across both of those appearances. At the regional level, they came second in the inaugural edition, the competition known as the CONCACAF Championship, and they matched that with another second place finish in 1981, earning them a spot in their second World Cup. They've not come close since, though. The quarterfinals are best finished in the Gold Cup, which began in 1991.
All right, and there are a couple of noteworthy events for El Salvador here. So in 1982, a qualification knockout round with Honduras ignited what is known as the Football War. So in truth, it was about bigger political issues than just the match. But the match did spark the violence, although it didn't necessarily cause it. The other noteworthy event was during the 2014 World Cup qualification, where they were charged in a match-fixing scandal, and that led to the lifetime bans for 14 major players, as well as lesser bans for many others.
Yeah.
Wow, hey?
Yeah, quite something.
Yeah, okay, well, let's take a bit of a closer look at their World Cup. So their first completed campaign was in 1970, and it was successful. They were actually aided by Mexico hosting the cup, so Mexico didn't go through the qualification competition, although there was only one spot available. El Salvador did it again in 1982. They and Honduras finishing ahead of Mexico to take the 2 spots that were allotted to the region by that time. In the cups, though, they fared poorly, losing all games across both cups and suffering a record-breaking 10-1 loss at the hands of Hungary, the only team in the World Cup ever to suffer a double-digit loss. After each successful qualification, though, they failed to reach the final round of qualifying in the subsequent cup. But otherwise, they did reach the final round of qualification from 1970 to 1998. Since 2002, though, they have reached the final round of qualification in only 2 of the 6 cups, most recently benefiting from the final round expanding from 6 to 8 teams in 2022.
That's right. All right, well, I'll go over a regional cup overview. So El Salvador hosted and finished second in the first CONCACAF Championship. They finished fourth in the following version, but struggled after that during the period where they reached their first World Cup. It was a strong period in both tournaments around 1980, with another second place finish actually earning them their spot in the 1982 World Cup. That would prove their strongest period, but there were minor peaks in 2002 and 3, as well as 2011 and 2013. In both cases, they passed the group stage of the Gold Cup for 2 tournaments in a row. While consistently qualifying for the Cup since 2007, the quarterfinals remains the limit of their success.
All right, and now we enter our deep dive into the Regional Cup, beginning in 1963, where El Salvador hosted the first CONCACAF championship. After finishing second behind Honduras in the group stage, they were one of the 4 teams in the final round robin. And there they beat Honduras and Netherlands Antilles, that's now known as Curacao, and they were poised to win as host. However, they suffered a heavy 4-1 defeat to Costa Rica and finished second. From 1965 onwards, it was a 6-team round robin, and they finished 4th. Over the next 4 tournaments, they didn't enter, were disqualified, withdrew, and then failed to qualify, as we mentioned in the overview there.
El Salvador returned to the tournament in 1977 in good form, finishing 3rd behind Mexico and Haiti, then 2nd in 1981 behind host Honduras, both of them qualifying for the 1982 World Cup, preventing 3rd place Mexico. Local rivals Honduras also finished ahead of them in the group stage in 1985, while 1989 was an interesting cascade of misfortune. Experiencing numerous problems, they didn't play their first match until the other teams had played 3 of their 4. A home match against Costa Rica saw crowd trouble after a headed goal by El Salvador was questionably ruled to have been handled. The match had to be abandoned due to that, and their punishment was playing further home matches in the hardly neutral ground of Honduras. In the end, the last 2 matches were cancelled because by that point the results didn't even matter.
Yeah, that was a big mess. I actually saw the video of that header that caused the crowd trouble, and I got to say, it looks like a bad call from the referee. It didn't seem to touch his hand. Anyway, that was a poor finish for them to the CONCACAF Championship era, and 1991 began the Gold Cup era. Qualification, as we've mentioned, was now earned through the UNCAF Nations Cup, and again, 3 of the 5 teams, top teams in that cup, earning qualification for the Gold Cup. They did poorly, though, in the first 5 campaigns, either not qualifying or reaching the cup but losing in the group stage. They earned a single win over Trinidad and Tobago all the way until 2002. 2002 and 2003, though, saw them pass the group stage, though both are based on single wins in a 3-team group stage where the top 2 passed. They lost heavily in the quarterfinals to USA and Costa Rica, respectively. And then 2005 marks the last edition where they failed to qualify. And since then, they have fallen either at the group stage or at the quarterfinal stage.
Yeah, and only from 2011 are the results noteworthy. There they tied Costa Rica and thrashed Cuba 6-1 to reach the quarterfinal, where they almost beat Panama but for a last-minute goal, eventually losing on penalties at the quarterfinal stage. In subsequent tournaments, when they passed the group stage, it was usually as a 3rd-place team in the group, which paired them with the top team in the quarterfinals. It was USA in 2013 and 17, and they lost both times. And actually, they fell at the group stage in 2015.
All right, well, 2019 saw the new qualification system through the CONCACAF Nations League. In that year, 2018-2019 Nations League, it was only a placement tournament, and they needed to finish in the top 10 to qualify. Actually, the top 6 teams in the region qualified automatically, so then it would be the top 10 among the remaining teams. And El Salvador barely did so, finishing 10th of 10, a loss to Bermuda almost undoing them, but a win over Jamaica saving them. So they actually performed well in the tournament in the 2019 Gold Cup, tying Jamaica in Jamaica, actually, and beating the quickly improving Curacao. However, despite beating them in the head-to-head game, they finished behind Curacao on goal difference. And in this tournament, which was now 16 teams instead of 12, only the top 2 advanced. Okay, that is their long history, and we go to the recent tournaments. The Gold Cup 2021. How did they do?
Yeah, so they qualified through the Nations League. They were actually in Nations League B. They lost in Dominican Republic, but otherwise won all their games. St. Lucia and Montserrat, the other teams. So they finished atop the group and qualified for the Cup. At the tournament, they comfortably beat Guatemala and Trinidad and Tobago, but went down on a single goal to Mexico in an exciting game where they almost earned a draw. Um, in the quarterfinal, they went 3-0 down to Qatar and all looked lost until their stand-in forward Joaquin Rivas, replacing the ill David Rugamas, scored two quick goals, making an exciting finish, though they again fell short of equalizing. But a competitive game, and you have to say a pretty competitive tournament for them overall.
Yeah, yeah, I remember it. I think El Salvador can be a really fun team to watch, and I think it was in one of those games where I remembered the fans singing for the whole game. It was really impressive.
Yeah, I mean, another quarterfinal exit, but you think, with two wins and a narrow loss to Mexico and then a close loss to Qatar, probably a more competitive quarterfinal finish than even some of the previous ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's see how they did in the World Cup 2022 qualification.
Well, like Panama, they weren't one of the five teams that got an automatic bye to the octagon, so they had a long qualification route. Um, they were first forced through two knockout rounds or 2 rounds of qualification to reach the octagon. They suffered only a draw with the troublesome Montserrat in the first round. That was a round robin, but comfortably qualified for the next round. And there, a playoff win over St. Kitts and Nevis saw them through, and they won both legs there. They
Yeah, they
proved,
seem to have a little bit of trouble with Montserrat, not only
yeah,
here but
that's
elsewhere.
funny.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, they proved mildly competitive in the final round, beating Panama at home and a poor Honduras away, um, and besting and finishing ahead of them. They tied Jamaica twice and otherwise earned a home draw with the USA in their opener, but ultimately they finished seventh out of eight in the final group stage and weren't ever really close to qualifying for the World Cup.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, the last thing we'll look at is 2022 UEFA Nations League in terms of games, at least.
Yeah, so they had been promoted to League A, where they faced the United States and Grenada. Um, they beat and tied Grenada, and then lost and tied the USA. Once again, tying the USA at home as they did in World Cup qualification. So their 5 points from 4 games saw them comfortably in second, well behind the US, but well ahead of Grenada. So second keeps them in League A and earned them automatic qualification to this tournament.
Right, and a last minute goal by USA. Otherwise, they would have beat them there. And we'll end the section with a comment on their players. So again, a deep dive in the World Cup qualifying series that we did, but just an overview here. El Salvador has not played a lot since the end of 2022 World Cup qualifications. That was in March 2022. They played their 4 CONCACAF Nations League games and then 3 friendlies in between those. There seem to be no major retirements, although Alexander Larin, Darwin Seren, and Nelson Bonilla all are in their early 30s and haven't played since last September, so kind of up in the air there. They retain a handful of reasonably experienced players. Those would be players in their late 20s with 50 caps or more. About half of the players are with their clubs in El Salvador, Alianza and FAS, the biggest of those, and those playing out of country are predominantly in the USA, with a few other in Central American countries or in Colombia. Several young players are with big MLS clubs, like the 22-year-old goalkeeper Thomas Romero with Toronto FC. Have you heard of him, Connor?
I haven't, no.
Okay, I know you're a bit more familiar with Toronto FC than me, but there he is. And also there's 19-year-old Diego Barahona with LAFC and 18-year-old Robinson Aguirre of Colorado Rapids in the USA. So potentially players that that they might build around for the future.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Well, one thing that surprises me about Costa Rica is that despite that, all those lifetime suspensions that they received in 2014, they've been very steady. It didn't seem to actually affect their play that much or their record.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it kind of came and went somewhat quietly. Like, you can't really imagine that happening to a lot of other teams, even in the region. But yeah, as it was, they kind of maintained some competitiveness. I mean, they're kind of, I would say, on the edge of being a second tier team in the region, but they, like you said, they kind of stuck around that position despite the loss of all those players.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good way of putting it, on the edge of second tier. Okay, well, instead of doing, the fourth team in the group, we don't know what it is. So we're going to take a quick look at the four candidates. That's Martinique, Suriname, Puerto Rico, and St. Lucia. And we'll start with Martinique. Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, so currently their ELO rank is 107, so they're the top ranked team among these playoff countries. So Martinique is not a country unto itself, but rather an overseas department or region of France. So they can kind of be likened to a province of France. Because they're not an independent country, they cannot be a member of FIFA, and so don't compete in World Cup competition. They do, however, have membership in CONCACAF and have participated in its regional competition, the Gold Cup, since 1991. They have reached the finals in 7 of its 16 editions, including 4 of the last 5. Only once have they passed their group stage, and that was when they reached the quarterfinals in 2002. In their 2021 Gold Cup appearance, they lost all games in a tough group with Canada, the US, and Haiti. In the 2022-23 CONCACAF Nations League, they finished third, which was last, in their League A group with Costa Rica and Panama. But they did earn 1 point in a draw at home with Panama.
Right. So if they get through, all three of those teams will be gathered once again.
Yeah.
But to get through, they will have to overcome Suriname. So Suriname was called Dutch Guiana until 1975. They actually competed for their first World Cup in 1962 and the Regional Cup since 1973. They've only once reached the final round of World Cup qualifying. That was in 1978. They reached the regional finals in 1977 and in 1985, and again recently in 2021. They were not competitive at that level, though, earning only a draw with Honduras in 1985 and a win over Guadeloupe in 2021, falling at the group stage in both cases. In the 2022-23 CONCACAF Nations League, like Martinique, they finished third, which was last in their League A group, and they were with Mexico and Jamaica. They earned only 1 point in a draw at home with Jamaica there. Our third team is Puerto Rico.
Yeah, Puerto Rico is ranked 176th in ELO, behind the 107th of Martinique and 130th of Suriname. Puerto Rico first entered World Cup qualification in 1974 and regional competition a year earlier in 1973. They have never come close to reaching the World Cup, never getting past the second of 4 or 5 rounds of qualifying, nor have they reached the Regional Cup. They came 33rd of 34th in the 2018-19 CONCACAF Nations League placement round. In the following season, they came second in their League C group and remained at the lowest level. In the 2022-23 CONCACAF Nations League, they easily won all games over Cayman Islands and British Virgin Islands, which earned them promotion to League B and that Gold Cup playoff spot. So they have shown good improvement, albeit at a very low level.
That's right. Okay, so League C Puerto Rico and also League C St. Lucia ranked 179. And St. Lucia played their first international game in 1989 and entered competitions from 1991. But they've never come close to qualifying for a World Cup, like Puerto Rico, never getting past the second of 4 or 5 rounds of qualifying. They came 13th of 34 in that 2018-19 CONCACAF Nations League placement round. However, they were 3 places shy of the 10 teams that reached the Gold Cup. In the following season, they came 4th in their League B group and were demoted to League C. And then in the most recent season, they won all games over Anguilla and Dominica and earned promotion back to League B and this Gold Cup playoff spot. All right, so we saw that the rankings are all below 100. Martinique 107, Suriname 130, Puerto Rico and St. Lucia 176 and 79 respectively. So do you want to take us through an assessment there?
Sure. So Martinique and Suriname both qualify through the playoffs as third place finishers in League A, and they seem likely to win their games over St. Lucia and Puerto Rico, who both qualify as winners of the lowly League C, of their lowly League C groups. Puerto Rico showed good improvement, but is only proven out at the League C level, and likely won't be enough to see them challenging the much stronger League A teams. Martinique and Suriname were out of their depth in League A, and probably will be in the Cup too. Both reached the Gold Cup in 2021, but fell at the group stage, Martinique losing all games and Suriname winning only over Guadeloupe. That win suggests they have a chance against Martinique here, but Martinique has reached the Cup far more often than Suriname and seemed the more likely candidate to reach the Cup.
All right, and do you have a preference there? Like, who? Anyone? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I favor Martinique. They're the highest ranked team and have a pretty good Gold Cup pedigree. They've also been able to draw on some players who play for France at youth levels and or formerly, have some connection with France. So I think they probably have the strongest squad. They have the best history, and I would expect them to win. But what about you?
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm favoring Martinique here. I think Suriname do have an outside chance, but like you, for the reasons you said, I favor Martinique. But we'll talk later on in our discussion section of, whether we see them challenging the three teams in the group above them there. Okay, so we are going to the third part of the podcast now, which is the so I'm just finding my place. We're going to the third part of the podcast, which is a comparison and discussion of the team. So we're going to start with the pots that they come from, and then look at their rankings after that.
Yeah, Costa Rica were ranked third among all Gold Cup teams, ahead of Canada actually, and they're the pot 1 team. Panama were the top of the pot 2 teams, so they were fifth out of the CONCACAF teams to qualify. So pretty strong pot 2 team. El Salvador, they ranked 10th among CONCACAF teams, so they were second out of 4 pot 3 teams. So I think all in all, it kind of leads to a competitive group. Costa Rica ranked third, probably not stronger than Canada. So I think kind of between third to 10th, not a lot to choose between 3 kind of similar sized countries.
Yeah, I mean, arguably not stronger than Panama, going by the most recent results. But we'll take a look at the head-to-head to see a bit of a longer view of how Costa Rica compares to Panama. Okay, let's take a look at the rankings, and we see Costa Rica does kind of lead the way there.
Yeah, they're 39th in FIFA and 40th in the slightly more reliable ELO rankings. So again, they are the highest ranked team in the group. Panama, they're ranked 58th in FIFA and 51st in ELO. They've kind of been up and down over the years, but are kind of at a relative high point. And then El Salvador are 75th in FIFA and 85th in ELO, which for them, they don't usually get above that mark and are the clear third ranked team in the group.
All right. Well, maybe we'll get a bit more insight through the head-to-head records, or maybe if you just read out their overall record, and I'll point out any really significant details.
Yeah. So a lot of these teams have played each other a lot, especially because they're all UNCAF teams. Costa Rica has a winning record over Panama with 18 wins, 6 draws, and 8 losses.
Now something really interesting here. I've actually divided that record into 3 parts. So before 2000, Costa Rica had the winning record, and even from 2000 to 2015, it was 9 wins, 2 ties, and 2 losses. But from 2015 onwards, they actually have an even record of 4 wins, 2 draws, and 4 losses each. So, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I think pretty even. We did mention that in the Gold Cup qualifying, which was a Nations League, Panama won both those games. So even though Costa Rica has a better record overall, Panama carries victories in the last 2 matches.
Yeah, that's right. So Panama getting the better of them recently, which will make for an interesting matchup here. How about Costa Rica's record with El Salvador?
Costa Rica has the winning record, 19 wins, 9 draws, and 7 losses.
Yeah, and I don't have much to add there. That's pretty consistent over time, and they've never really met in a really crucial match. So just over the years, meeting kind of in group stages and stuff like that. So Costa Rica with the better record there. How about El Salvador and Panama?
Well, this is interesting because it's almost even. El Salvador comes out slightly on top with 10 wins and 6 draws, but 9 losses. So those 10 wins and 9 losses, very even.
Yeah, very even. And I've also divided them into 2 parts. So prior to 2005, El Salvador had the record of 7 wins, 5 draws, and 0 losses. But since 2005, Panama has the better record: 9 wins, 1 draw, and 3 ties. 1 draw and 3 losses. So Panama with a vastly superior record since 2005.
Yeah, and as we saw in the deep dive, 2005 really marked kind of the start of a long and good period for Panama.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, well, now we'll move on to see what the odds makers say. So actually, there are not a lot of odds available at this time, maybe when we get closer to the Cup. We're not promoting gambling here, but just seeing what the odds makers make of it. And all I could find, Connor, was just the odds to win the tournament overall, but at least we can kind of view them relative to each other.
Yeah. So Costa Rica are favorite among these 3 teams at a 6.7% chance, but that's pretty low for a pot 1 team. Panama are given a 2.4% chance, and El Salvador 1.6. So none of these teams really favored to go all the way.
Right. Okay, but let's begin our discussion maybe by talking about those relative differences. Do you see Costa Rica as the favorites in this group? Actually, more than double the chance of Panama there.
Yeah, I mean, I think odds to win the tournament are a little bit different from odds to win the group.
Yeah.
But no, I don't see them as double the odds of Panama. I think those 2 teams are pretty neck and neck, actually. I don't think there's a heck of a lot to choose between them.
Yeah, I mean, Costa Rica has been, I guess, a little ahead of them, especially in World Cup play over the last while. That's a bit odd with Costa Rica because they do look a lot stronger in World Cup than in the Regional Cup, not passing the quarterfinals. So, what do you make of Costa Rica?
Yeah, it's kind of baffling that they can consistently be one of the top 3 or 4 teams in World Cup qualification and yet can't get to the semifinals in this tournament. Certainly not with any regularity. As you mentioned, I think in terms of players are going to go through a big transition zone, but they were surprisingly kind of dogged and on in World Cup qualification and finished 4th again. And they don't always go far, but they usually win their groups here at the Gold Cup. So in my mind, they're still probably the team to beat in this group.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like we dislike Costa Rica or anything, but just looking at their player situation, we've been kind of predicting a recession for quite a while that has not come to pass, kind of like world economics right now. And their veterans have just been pulling out of the bag. But again, I mean, at the risk of sounding negative again, I wonder how long that can go on for. And we saw they haven't really done as much as Panama in trying to rebuild their team.
Yeah, do you think Panama has the edge?
Well, the thing about Panama is that they do kind of sometimes lapse. I mean, we kind of saw that at the end of World Cup qualification where they weren't able to hold on to that fourth place, even though I think we said that they had a 5 point lead going into the
Yeah.
last 4 or 5 games, and they've lapsed in other cases. When we were doing the history there, one of the things surprised me. It was I think a tie in the group with Bahamas or something. So that propensity to lapse is a bit of a worry for me with Panama. Do you make anything of that?
I think Panama are more likely to lapse than Costa Rica, who are kind of frustratingly consistent at Gold Cup play. To bring El Salvador in, I do see them as a step behind both of these other teams, but they also are coming off, probably one of their best tournaments in recent history in the 2021 Gold Cup, and were competitive in some of their games in the World Cup qualifying. So I think there's a possibility that they could surprise one of these teams, and probably Panama more likely. But I also see Panama strong enough to win the group, which is what makes this one so interesting.
Yeah, well, a couple of points there for me. I actually see them as a bit more likely to surprise Costa Rica, despite what I said about Panama. Two things. I was surprised, actually. I thought Costa Rica was a much bigger country than El Salvador. Actually, all three of these are about the same size. Costa Rica has been historically stronger, but there's not really any reason for that. The other thing, too, that struck me during the history was El Salvador's performance in the last cup, which you just mentioned. Almost scoring against Mexico at the end there, almost passing the quarterfinals with their comeback against Qatar. So they do sometimes show some good spunk at the cup. So I'm kind of almost pulling for them to be a challenger here to the two teams above.
Yeah, I think it would make the group interesting. I think it's possible that they do end up losing both games, but any points taken would probably be enough to knock one of these teams off first place.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, we have seen that Panama and El Salvador are both quite a bit stronger at home than they are on the road. So that may give Costa Rica a bit of the edge, who don't seem as kind of vulnerable on the road.
Yeah, and first and second place could matter quite a bit here because the second place team would play a first place finisher in another group, so you could end up meeting USA or Mexico or even Canada in your next game, and where you'd be kind of the underdogs, where first place could give you a real advantage. So it's, finishing first is, I think, quite significant here.
Yeah, good point. Well said. Do you see any hope for the team that comes in? We kind of predicted Martinique. Do you see Martinique or Suriname? I'd be really surprised if Puerto Rico or St. Lucia made it.
Yeah, I would be too. If Suriname got here, I think they would not be competitive. But I do see Martinique possibly being more competitive, partly because they have a better history in this tournament as well. They even beat Canada, I think, in 2013. In the group stage of the Gold Cup. So I think Martinique, I'd like to see them in the group. I think they were probably at their strongest point, a few years ago as compared to now. But I wouldn't expect they would get out. But yeah, I think they could get a point off someone.
Do you see them challenging for third?
Not really. I mean, if it comes down to a one-off game between El Salvador and Martinique, there's always a chance they could tie or finish ahead of them on goal difference. But no, I don't really see them coming in and being strong enough to really challenge for third place, or certainly not second.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. You said they do have a pretty good Gold Cup history, but it's more a history of reaching the cup, which is an achievement in itself. I think only maybe at the game level or one time did they pass the group stage, and Suriname not at all. So yeah, I can't really give them much of a chance. I mean, there really is such a big division between the second tier teams and the third tier teams in CONCACAF that it would be hard to see them even challenge for third. Hey.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
All right. Well, I'm going to pin you down here, Connor. And actually, I should pin myself down because I've been a bit all over the place here. But you tell me what you think is going to happen.
Well, I keep writing Costa Rica off. They haven't quite fallen off yet. I do see it coming, but I'm going to say they have one tournament left in them. I'm going to say Costa Rica wins the group, Panama second, El Salvador third, and I'll say Martinique fourth.
All right. Well, I thought I was the one who was kind of all over the place with Costa Rica, but I'm going to differ from you there. I think in current form, I'm going to give it to Panama in first and Costa Rica second, El Salvador and Martinique in fourth. I have a couple of percentage chance here. I think it's almost even odds that Costa Rica and Panama will finish first, but I'm going to give it 52% to Panama, and then a 40% chance of Suriname qualifying instead of Martinique, but only about a 10% chance of whoever makes it challenging El Salvador for third place.
All right.
And then a 10% chance that we're completely wrong all around, and Puerto Rico wins the group.
There is always that possibility.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of Group C, and we will sign off and look forward to talking about Group D.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye. Bye. All right. Please check the show notes for a link to a short video about our past, present, and future media casts, and all other links to navigate you through our system, including a link to our YouTube channel where each series is separated into its own playlist.